Well, it's 2 o'clock, everybody, and I'd like to welcome everyone to Think Tank Thursday with Hospitality International. My name is Bridget Lonis, and I am the Creative Services Manager. And today I'm filling in for Gary Gobin, the Director of Operations, who would normally be starting these webinars on Thursdays. Both Gary and I have been looking forward to this particular webinar with Elavon because I know that chargebacks is a huge subject for most of you. And so without further delay, I'd like to pass over to the people we've got joining us from Elavon today. First of all, we have Laurie Worley. She is the Manager of Global Disputes. We have Mandy Warren, the Assistant Manager of Global Disputes, and also Brian Boyden, Senior Manager at Global Disputes, and also Timothy Bork, who is the National Sales Director. Laurie, Mandy, and Brian's time in the dispute department at Elavon actually represents a combined 50 years of chargeback knowledge. So without further ado, I'd like to pass this webinar over to them, and they will be happy to answer any questions that you might have at the end. If you are not able to attend for the entire webinar, there will be a recording which will be sent to you a couple of days later. So over to you then, Mandy.
Thank you. I'm Mandy. As she said, I'm an assistant manager here in the disputes department, and today we'll be covering the retrieval and chargeback overview. So on our agenda today is going to be the dispute processes. We're going to go over MasterCard. We'll cover retrievals, chargebacks, the second cycle and pre-arbitration stage, the arbitration, pre-compliance and good faith, and chargeback categories. We'll also cover the VCR, which is Visa Claims Resolution. We'll cover retrievals, allocation, and collaboration for that. We'll also cover some best practices to help you out there and some contact information and references to assist you. The dispute process is of MasterCard. So the retrievals is the beginning stage of this. So it's a request by the issuer or cardholder to the acquirer for a copy of the actual receipt of the specific transaction that's in dispute. This is a non-financial request, and the time frame for the acquirer is 30 days on this. At the 15-day mark, a reminder letter will be sent out if there's no response that has been received by us. So retrievals for which there's no response received may result in a $25 chargeback fee as well, and the fee will be charged by the card network. If no response is received to the retrieval request, a facsimile draft will be created on your behalf in order to fill the retrieval to prevent the chargeback from occurring. So some of the recommended responses to these are going to be, we like to include the original retrieval letter, any supporting documentation that you have that may contain the merchant's name and location, card number, transaction amount, signature of the card holder, the entry mode of the transaction, and detail of the charges. All right, so on to the chargeback. So the chargeback is a dispute by the issuer or cardholder to the acquirer for the transaction previously processed and paid to the merchant. So these are going to be for financial liability is shifted to the merchant. The time frame for the acquirer is 45 days on these. Issuing banks are not required to provide notification prior to the dispute. A chargeback memo advice, as we call the CMA letter, is sent out at the time of the debit, along with the sales detail and any supporting documentation that we have received from the issuer. When accepting cases, the merchant can either not respond, or check the appropriate box on the CMA letter and respond accordingly. So when the merchant has responded to us, we will then represent the case back to the issuing bank. So a second presentment to the issuer from the acquirer, this would require a request should include the original CMA letter, all supporting documents to refute the chargeback. A request will be sent if additional information is needed and there's time permitting us. All documentation will be sent and financial liability will be shifted back to the issuer during the representment process. For the second cycle chargebacks, a second dispute by the issuer to the acquirer for the same transaction previously charged back and represented. So it's initiated by the cardholder or the issuing bank. The financial liability is shifted back to the merchant and remains with the merchant until the acquirer is refunded by the issuer. The time frame for these are also 45 days. This will also receive a chargeback memo advice. A CMA letter will be sent to the merchant at the time of the debit, along with the sale detail and any supporting documentation we've received from the issuing bank. And just like the first one, when accepting the cases, the merchant can either not respond or they can check the appropriate box on the CMA letter and respond accordingly to us. All responses are screened and submitted back to the issuer through pre-arbitration. Okay, so at the arbitration cycle, this will be the final step of the disputes process. MasterCard reviews all documentation to determine who will be financially liable for the transaction. So it is initiated by the client and the acquirer. We initiate that for you within the 45-day time frame of the second chargeback cycle. So there are fines and penalties associated with the arbitration stage. The base fee is $420 assessed to the losing party. There's also a technical fee of $100 per occurrence to the party causing the violation. Okay, and on to the compliance stage. It is a violation of a specific regulation that causes a financial loss to the other member. So typically sent as a pre-compliance to be resolved between the acquirer and issuer prior to involving the card network. The time frame for the member to respond to pre-compliance is 30 days from the initiation of it. Compliance can be submitted by the initiator if a favorable resolution doesn't occur. There is a base fee for this of $500 for Visa and $420 for MasterCard, and that fee will be assessed to the losing party. The technical fee is $100 per occurrence, and that will also be assessed to the party causing the violation. Next, we have our good faith process. This is a final attempt to resolve a dispute between the acquirer and the issuer on a collections basis. So a good faith occurs after all other timeframes have expired. There's no set rules from the associations, so no timeframes. And then reminder letters are going to be sent at 30, 60, and 90 days to the issuing bank. If no response is received, the case will be considered closed at that point. So possible fees that can be charged from this, from the issuer upon accepting a good faith, fees could range anywhere from $50 to 10% of the accepted amount of the chargeback. Okay. So our chargeback categories. So chargeback reason codes fall into one of 5 categories. So it'll either be a request for authorization, authorization errors, processing errors, service disputes disputed by the cardholder, and fraud. Each reason code can be classified as preventable or non-preventable. So on to the reason codes for MasterCard. We have MasterCard. First is 4863, the cardholder doesn't recognize. The chargeback conditions for this is the issuer received information from the cardholder indicating that the transaction cannot be recognized. And what we would need would be to provide additional information to the cardholder to help them recognize that transaction. That would remedy that. On the authorization, reason code is going to be 4808, and that is no authorization. A valid authorization was not obtained for that transaction, and we would need you to provide proof of a valid authorization for the amount in question. For processing errors, in MasterCard is 4834, and this would be the point of interaction error. The cardholder claims to have been billed incorrectly. So we would need you to provide proof that the transaction was processed correctly when it was processed at the terminal. Then for the service disputes by the cardholder, it's going to be MasterCard's 4853. These are going to be not as described, services not rendered, and credit not processed. And the conditions on that is going to be the cardholder claim that what they had ordered was not expected or as described. So what we would need from the merchant would be to provide proof that the services were as described or that the services were rendered, credit is not due, or a detailed rebuttal to the cardholder's claim. Then on to our fraud reason codes. We have the first one is 4837 is a fraudulent transaction. The cardholder claims that they did not authorize a card present transaction. We would need documentation proving that the cardholder did participate in that transaction. On the 4870 would be the chip liability shift. So the cardholder is claiming that they did not authorize a card present transaction there as well. And we would need to provide documentation proving that the cardholder did participate in that transaction. The 4871 is also a chip and pin liability shift. The cardholder claims that they didn't authorize, again, so proof of the transaction was processed with a device that is EMV PIN compliant and that the transactions were correctly processed would be the proof we would need to remedy that reason code. Okay, so then service disputes by the cardholder. These are all going to be the same as the fraud reason codes, the 4837, 4870, and 4871. The conditions on all three of these is going to be the cardholder claims that they did not authorize the card present transaction. And so what they would need to provide for the 4837 would be provide documentation proving that the cardholder did participate. For the chip liability, they would need proof that the transaction was processed with a device that has the EMV PIN compliant and transactions was correctly processed. And with the 4871s, they would need the transaction was a chip-initiated transaction resulting in a POS entry mode of 05 or 07. And the transaction was a fallback transaction. The authorization record needs to contain the POS entry mode code of 90, and the service codes needs to be encoded on the magnetic strip. Does not indicate that there was presence of a chip there. So on to the dispute process for Visa, which is VCR, is Visa Claims Resolution. So there is a retrieval stage here. It is a request by the issuer or cardholder to the acquirer requesting a copy of the actual receipt for the specific transaction that's being disputed. This is a non-financial request, and the time frame on this for the acquirer is 30 days. A reminder letter will be sent out at 15 days if we have not received a response to the retrieval. So the retrievals for which no response is received may result in a fee of $25 as well as chargeback exposure, and this fee will be charged by the card network. If no response is received to the retrieval request, we will create a facsimile draft that will be provided on your behalf in order to remedy and fulfill the retrieval to occur the dispute. On the recommended responses for these is the same as what MasterCard would be. You want to include the original retrieval letter, supporting documents containing the following information would be merchant name and location, card number, transaction amount, the signature of the card holder, the entry mode, and any details of the charges that you may have. So on to the chargeback process for Visa. We have allocation. Allocation is going to be a fraud or authorization dispute transaction request by the issuer or cardholder to the acquirer for a transaction processed and paid to the merchant. The time frame for the acquirer on these is going to be 30 days. The chargeback memo advice, the CMAAL, is sent at the time of the debit along with the sale detail and any supporting documentation from the issuer. When accepting these cases, the merchant can either not respond or they can check the appropriate box on the CMAAL and respond accordingly. All responses to continue into pre-arbitration should include the original CMA-AL letter signed by the merchant and all supporting documentation to refute the dispute. So in allocation, we have a pre-arbitration request. It's going to be a request from the acquirer or the merchant to go into arbitration. A letter will be sent or a call will be made if additional information is needed and there is time permitting on the case. If the proper information is provided, a pre-arbitration request will be sent to the issuing bank. Financial liability will stay with the merchant until dispute is received with the issuing bank or the card network in arbitration. So on the pre-arbitration response, when we receive this back, so this would be the response we're receiving back from the issuing bank or cardholder regarding the pre-arbitration request. The issuing bank has 30 days to respond. The responses that can be received would be accept full, so the merchant would receive a full credit. Accept partial, the merchant would receive a partial credit, or a decline would be the merchant will receive no credit. And the merchants can decide to go on into arbitration for both a partial accept or a full decline. So on the allocation arbitration, the final step of the disputes process, the association reviews all documentation to determine who will be financially liable for the transaction. In this stage, the acquirer has 10 days to respond. As along with all the other arbitration, there are fines and penalties that are associated with this. So the base fee is $500 for Visa, and that will be assessed to the losing party. There are also technical fees. That's $100 per occurrence that will be assessed to the party that has caused the violation. And below is just a flow chart that shows the back and forth between Elavon and the issuer, and the time frames are there as well. Okay, so for our allocation disputes, these are our reason codes for them. So all of our fraud reason codes are 10.1, EMV liability shift counterfeit fraud. 10.2 is EMV liability shift non-counterfeit fraud. 10.3 is other fraud card present. 10.4 is other fraud card absent environment. And 10.5 is Visa fraud monitoring program. So to remedy those 5 reason codes, on the EMV cases, we would need proof that the card was processed correctly through an EMV chip capable terminal. For all other reason codes, we would need any proof that you have that the cardholder did authorize the charge. Our other set of reason codes that falls under the allocation bucket is going to be our authorization. So that is 11.1 is card recovery bulletin. 11.2 is going to be declined authorization, and 11.3, no authorization. So to remedy those cases, what we would need from the merchant would be proof that proper authorization was obtained at the time of the sale. On to collaboration. So collaboration is a processing error or a consumer dispute transaction request by the issuer or cardholder to the acquirer for a transaction processed and paid to the merchant. This as well holds a 30-day time frame that the acquirer has. A chargeback memo advice will be sent. This is called the CMA-CL. It's sent at the time of the debit along with the sale detail and any supporting documentation that we have received from the issuer. When accepting the cases, the merchant should respond by checking the appropriate box on the CMA-CL and return to us. So for your dispute response to the collaboration, it's going to be a rebuttal to the dispute transaction to the issuer from the acquirer. So the request should include the original CMA-CL letter and all supporting documents to refute the dispute. A letter will be sent or a call will be made if additional information is needed from the merchant and if there is time permitting on the case. Financial liabilities will shift to the issuing bank once the response is received by the card network. So collaboration, pre-arbitration is a request from the issuing bank or the cardholder to go into pre-arbitration. And with that, the acquirers have a 30-day time frame to respond. The pre-arbitration letter, the PLMCL, is sent to the merchant upon the receipt of the request along with any supporting documentation from the issuing bank. On the pre-arbitration response is a response from the acquirer to the pre-arbitration. So all responses will continue into arbitration should include the original PLMCL, letter signed by the merchant, and all supporting documents to refute the dispute. And a letter will be sent or a call will be made if additional information is needed and time is permitting. With this, the merchant has 7 days from receipt to withdraw from the arbitration. And with that, there is also a $25 withdrawal fee. So collaboration, arbitration. This is the final step in the disputes process. The association reviews all documentation to determine who will be financially liable for the transaction. There is a base fee of $500 for Visa assessed to the losing party. There is also the technical fee that is $100 per occurrence, and that is assessed to the party that has caused the violation. And below is the flow chart between the issuing bank and Elavon. So for our collaboration disputes, the reason codes are as below. 12.1 is late presentment. 12.2 is incorrect transaction code. 12.3 is incorrect currency. 12.4 is incorrect account number. 12.5 is incorrect amount. 12.6.1 is duplicate processing, and 12.6.2 is paid by other means. To remedy these reason codes, for the 12.1, we would need proof that the sale was processed in the proper time frame. For 12.2, we'd need proof that the transaction code, the seller debit, was processed correctly. 12.3, we would need proof that the transaction was processed in the correct currency. And 12.4 would be proof that the correct payment card number was used. 12.5, proof that the cardholder was charged the correct amount. On 12.6.1, we would need proof of 2 separate sales were authorized by the cardholder. 12.6.2 would be proof that there were 2 separate charges. So on to the consumer disputes for collaboration. 13.1 is going to be merchandise or services not received. 13.2, canceled recurring transaction. 13.3, not as described or defective merchandise or services. 13.4 would be counterfeit merchandise. 13.5 is misrepresentation. 13.6 is credit not processed. And 13.7 is canceled merchandise or services. So to remedy these cases, the information that we would need for 13.1 would be proof that the cardholder had received the services or merchandise. 13.2 would be proof the cardholder did not cancel or cancel later due to an installment plan. 13.3 would be proof of services, merchandise were provided as described. 13.4, we would need proof of authenticity. 13.5 would be proof items or services were as described. 13.6 would be credit or proof of cancellation and refund policy, and it would be the same remedy as well for 13.7. Okay, so that covers all of our dispute stuff. So we've got some best practices that we like to share with you all to help out with the processing. So authorizations, just some additional information on how to avoid authorization-related disputes. The first authorization should be for the estimated length of the stay. The second one would be there is a 15% variance protection for the transaction. So food establishments should allow up to a 20% variance. Third, we have if the final amount is more than 15% of the original amount, incremental authorization codes must be obtained. And fourth, we have if payment is declined, an alternate form of payment should be requested. Attempts to reauthorize the transaction may result in disputes. On no-show transactions, the following information is required to remedy the no-show transactions. So we would need the cardholder's name, the cardholder's address, phone number, the arrival date, the confirmation number for the stay, and no-show should be written on the signature line of the folio. For paperless transactions, acquirers will have difficulty defending these disputes for any fraud codes if the merchant fails to obtain proof of the cardholder's authorization. So if this information is unattainable, the merchant should still provide compelling evidence during the dispute cycle. Compelling evidence that can include would be address verification, so the AVS, the card verification value, the CVV or the CVC, and proof that the cardholder's name matches the customer's name. For proper disclosure, must be clear and concise and not be open to interpretation. Refund policy disclosures must be legibly printed in letters approximately 0.25 inches high near the cardholder's signature area so that they are able to see that when they are signing. If the refund or cancellation policy is on the back of the receipt, the cardholder must sign and initial the back of the receipt as evidence of proper disclosure. If the refund policy is embedded within the pages of a multiple page contract, the cardholder must initial that particular section of the contract for the policy to be considered properly disclosed. Internet reservations will require a click to accept button at the reservation checkout screen with the policy clearly stated on that page. And so just an added note, a merchant's cancellation and refund policy disclosure has no bearing on cases involving the quality of merchandise or service disputes. And a few other best practices are respond promptly to all retrieval requests, keep records of your sales drafts. We like to recommend to keep 13 months or longer. And sales drafts must be completely legible, so be sure to check your ink levels and the ribbon on your printers regularly to ensure that those are coming out clear, and also make the transactions easy to recognize in your system. So here we have some chargeback contact information. With the FHMS chargeback support at elavon.com, you can send questions, case questions there, and those will be answered promptly. We also have an inbound phone call or phone team here that you can call in to. That number is listed there below, 1-866-600-5008. Our hours of operation are Monday through Friday, 8:30 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then we have a few links down here with reference guides to Visa, MasterCard, and Discover. Okay, and I think now I will turn it over to Tim.
That's me, and yes, so obviously we have gone ahead and created a preferred partner vendor relationship with Hospitality International. For both the acquiring aspect and the gateway and security for those who have integrated solutions. You can go to the next page there. Just a little bit about Elavon. Obviously, we are a very large processor. One thing that I always like to point out is we're one of the tops in terms of hospitality, more focused obviously on the lodging aspect. We're one of the leaders in regards to that. So any solutions surrounding the hospitality standpoint, I always say it's a top priority for us. If you want to go on to the next slide. With that being said, here's just a little bit of overview. Right now we have 10 out of the top 15 largest hotel companies using our gateway security and having a preferred vendor relationship with us on the acquiring standpoint. With that being said, obviously there's dedicated people that you guys will have as reflected under that partnership, where obviously that team is specific to our lodging vertical, which really differentiates us from a lot of other companies where they have just a generalized customer service. If you want to go to the next slide. So in surrounding us, obviously we offer EMV, both integrated and non-integrated. And what that really means is if you do have a point of sale system or a property management system, we do have the ability to integrate to make it a seamless process. If you do not operate that way, we have standalone terminals such as the Point terminal, which is reflected in the picture. And all of our solutions obviously are tokenized, encrypted, PCI validated. But on top of that, we do have other things that we do offer, whether it's DCC and third-party payments, specifically around our Converge hospitality solution. I know in terms of the chargebacks, there might be some ways for us to help get around you guys initiating those chargebacks for those card not present type transactions. So just keep that in mind should you have any questions. If you want to go to the next slide. Our specific contact rep for our solutions, other than myself, is Morgan Anderson. So here's his direct contact information that you guys will be able to reach out to him should you have any questions. And obviously, if you're not able to reach out or get a hold of him, I will be the next in line in terms of contact. And you can go on to the next one. So are there any questions?
If you want, could I just butt in here? If you want to type a question at the bottom of your screen, you should see 3 little buttons. One says chat, one says raise hand, and one says Q&A. If you type in there, you can type in a question, and then they can answer that. So I see that we have one question there. Who's going to answer that one?
So on this one would be a question that would have to be answered by the relationship manager. This is not something that we would know here in the chargeback department.
Can you just share what the question is?
It is, I worry about having card numbers written down since I do not use a property management system. Is there a way to store them for use after check-in without increasing the chance of a chargeback?
So in terms of storing numbers, we PCI, you can't store numbers. We do have a product called Converge Hospitality, which is for those card not present solutions that probably you're alluding to on this one. We could dig into some more specifics around that just to make sure that we can answer that accordingly. But I'm almost 9 times out of 10 sure this is going to be a Converge Hospitality solution that would benefit you on getting what you're trying to accomplish.
Okay. Oh, I think we have some other questions there too.
Great. So the next one is how can I add additional charges to a card on file without increasing the chargeback risk? It's never ideal to add additional charges on without first obtaining a separate authorization. So it greatly increases your risk if you do it without receiving another authorization on the card.
Is there anybody else that has any questions about anything in particular? Or any other hints and tips that you guys would like to share? Because obviously with 50 years experience between you, I'm sure you've seen a lot of situations.
That we have. We pretty much cover most of it in our presentation here. The big thing is the no-show, just ensuring that that no-show is written on that signature line, or at least somewhere on the folio. That's a huge thing that we see where it doesn't get written on there.
Right. So that's the main thing then that you're saying that gets missed out, that they don't write on it no-show.
Yeah, that's a lot of what we see is we don't have the no-show on there. Also, adding the additional charges, without obtaining more authorization.
I've always found Elavon is part of US Bank, and I've always found in all my dealings with them that they are very polite. They have excellent customer service, and they listen very patiently. They don't interrupt you when you're talking. I feel they're great to deal with. So I'm sure if you have any questions about anything, they will be very sympathetic towards your particular problems and issues that you're having. So Mandy, did you have anything else to add? Or I don't know if your colleagues who have been sitting there quietly watching, I'm sure, do they have anything that they'd like to add?
I don't have anything. Brian or Lori, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, I think it's all been covered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, just know we're here to help you. We work for you, so we're here to help you. Sometimes it may not seem like that, but we are. We have a vested interest in helping you win disputes and doing a good job for you. So never hesitate to call into our phone team. Any one of those people can help or get you the answers you need. So never hesitate to, if you got a question or something, just contact us. We'll help you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay then, guys. Well, I guess we'll wrap up. Thank you so much for sharing the information. There was an awful lot of information, and I'm sure having the presentation to be able to pass on to our franchisees, they will find that very useful. So I appreciate the time and effort that you spent in putting that together. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay then. Bye-bye then.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.